to start the meeting. Engineer Dr. MURITALA, you can start off the meeting now.
Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you to another edition of our technical session of the Nigerian Institute of Environmental Engineers, Lagos chapter. Yes,
from the
okay.
I am the house.
Okay. Kindly mute yourself if you are not the one having the mic. Please kindly mute yourself. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So I think we are to start by 16:30, which is 4:30, and we can begin. And I will call on the Vice Chairman in person of Engineer Yusuf Majalagbe to give us the opening remark.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm sure we all had a wonderful day at work. And we are very much welcome to this technical session, and I can assure you it promises to be very interesting. I want to, on behalf of the Nigerian Institution of Environmental Engineers, Lagos chapter, under the leadership of engineer Mrs. ABIOLA KOSEGBE, FNSE, FNIEE. She also doubles as the permanent secretary, Lagos State Ministry of Physical Planning and Urban Development. She is unavoidably, she's present with us, but in another engagement, official engagement. She will definitely make one or two comments as the technical session goes on. I want to warmly welcome you all once again to this technical session for the month of March 2022. This session commences as our regular activity at the NIE, Nigerian Institution of Environmental Engineers, Lagos State Chapter. As we had several sessions last year, which cut across lots of workshops, student outreach events. I know one of the students that actually won the first prize. I should think he's on the platform now, or okay, he'll be joining us soon. And we also recognize the presence of some of the sponsors for the occasion. They are right on this platform. In person of Mr. Engineer Agoro. We are so grateful and we appreciate you so much for your commitment towards the sustainability of our environment. We also had industrial visits to biogas plants, about 4 across Lagos, and we equally had stakeholders engagements, several stakeholders engagements, and of course we participated at all of the national program and some of the program organized by Nigerian Society of Engineers and COREN. Today we have a professor of repute, Professor Chukwumerije Okereke. He is the director of Center for Climate Change and Development at the Alex EKWUEME Federal University, EBONYI State, Nigeria. He is going to take us through the topic Global Climate Actions, Key Lessons from COP26. So the entire NIE is happy to have Professor Okereke in our midst, and this is a start of a long-term collaboration. But the question is, why do we need to discuss COP26 lessons? Now, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, also known as COP26, is a major gathering of world leaders who will discuss ways to intensify global actions to address the climate catastrophe. I mean, for the first time, almost 30 years from now, the world leaders gathered together to address climate change collectively. But I mean, the one held at Glasgow in Scotland, took place for 2 weeks in November 2021, with a lot of rigorous conversations, debates, and agreements. This COP has been unlike any previous ones for the private sector. The role of businesses in contributing to climate change has become so obvious that it must now take the lead in addressing the challenges. And that is why even in our midst today, we have a couple of environmental experts from the private sector here joining us to attend this technical session. And what are the actions that are required from us as a body and group of environmental engineers? And are there some actions, plans already in place in Nigeria and Lagos states? All of these, I'm sure Professor Chuks Okereke will actually lay bare for us. And these are some of the facts, we shall be gaining from this discussion. So I enjoin you to sit back, relax as you learn on key climate actions from our esteemed speaker. So on this note, I want to say thank you. I want us all to continue to max up and keep safe NIE towards a sustainable environment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Engineer Majulagwe. Thank you for the opening remark. I just want to confirm if our guest speaker is available, because I'm trying to see all the names, and I'm yet to see Professor Chuks. So he's yet to join us. So Chuks is yet to join us. So yeah, then I think the next point on the agenda is the citation of the guest speaker. So I wish you will be here on time, and possibly maybe Engineer Majulagwe, maybe you can get across to him while Engineer Dr. Sunday Egbukin will, the Green Building Doctor, will go ahead to give us his citation. So, Dr. Egbukin, are you there?
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So can we go ahead or we wait for the speaker?
I think it's important we go ahead. I think he is going to join us because, yes.
Okay, thank you very much and good evening all. So at this point, I would like to read the citation of our guest speaker this evening. Our guest speaker is person of Chukwumerije Okereke, a professor of global climate and environmental governance and Director of Center for Climate and Development at EKWUEME Federal University, Udufu Alike, Nigeria. Previously, he was a professor of environment and development at the University of Reading, where he also served as the co-director of Climate and Justice Center and the Leverhulme Climate Justice Doctoral Scholarship Program. Before joining Reading University, he was a senior research fellow and head of Climate and Development Center at Smith School Enterprise and the Environment University of Oxford, respectively. He remains a visiting fellow at Oxford University Environmental Change Institute. Professor Okereke's work is devoted to understanding the means of policy, strategy, and institutional arrangement that can help to address climate change and natural resources degradation in Africa in the context of sustainable development and Africa's structural economic transformation. He brings a unique perspective that emphasizes connection across scales of governance, from local through national to international dimensions. He has extensive experience in managing complex projects in the interface of governance, climate mitigation, adaptation, and low carbon development in various locations in Africa and around the world. Professor Okereke adopts a rigorous and methodical approach to the delivery of projects, which integrates stakeholder engagement, communication, innovation, effectiveness analysis, monitoring and evaluation, and climate change mainstreaming. Over the last 20 years, he has maintained an extensive high-impact engagement with national governments, businesses, and NGOs in Africa, and led on several high-profile international projects on climate change policy, mainstreaming, and green economy transition in Africa. He was the leader of a team that undertook the analysis of the adaptation components of Africa NDCD for the Africa Development Bank, as directed by the Climate and Green Growth Division of the bank. He was the founding project manager of Rwanda Green Growth and Climate Resilience Project, which was the first ever national low carbon plan in Africa. Other major research and consultancy work he has led include the Africa Adaptation Initiative, the UNDP-funded Africa Flagship Initiative on Climate Adaptation, mandated by the Committee of Africa Head of States on Climate Change, and elaborated under the guidance of the Africa Ministerial Conference on the Environment in conjunction with the Africa Group of Climate Change negotiators. The United Nations Economic Commission project, which explored the influence of Africa on the international climate regime, the ESRC GCRF funded project on governing inclusive green growth in Africa, which identify and analyze the key challenges facing Africa in the road to sustainable structural transformation and the green economy, and review an assessment of the World Bank funded $300 million Nigeria erosion and watershed management project. He is currently leading a project on assessing and enhancing the capacity of African institutions and policymakers to undertake sustainable green economy transition. Professor Okereke is a member of the high-level panel for the Africa Union Green Innovation Framework, which is developing a framework that will guide a harmonized and integrated transition to a green economy by Africa Union member states, in line with the Union's agenda of 2063. Professor Okereke is the coordinating lead author of the UN Intercontinental Panel on Climate Change IPCC ARCs on the introduction of framing chapter. He has served as a lead author on other major global scientific assessment projects, including the 5th assessment report of Intercontinental Panel of Climate Change IPCC, chapter on sustainable development and equity, and the United Nations Environmental Program Urbanization, Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service Assessment in chapters on Africa. He's also a lead author of the IPCC Special Report on 1.5. He was the moderator of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, Climate Diplomacy course from 2009 to 2011. He is the author of several journals articles and report on national and global environmental policy making. His book include Global Justice and Neoliberal Environmental Governance, the Policy of the Environment, and the Global Carbon Governance and Business Transformation. His latest book is Homegrown Development in Africa, published by Routledge. He is a member of the editorial board of the Journal Global Environmental Policy, the official journal on the Environmental Studies Session, International Study Association. He is a member of the Executive Committee, Environmental Studies Session, ISA, and the International Climate Strategy Network. Professor Okeke is the president and chairman board of trustees of the Society of Planet and Prosperity, Nigeria. His other outreach and charity work include advisory service to wide-ranging stakeholders, including government, NGO, community group, and commentaries in the ecologist nature, the conservation, as well as several TV and radio interviews. I can continue, and at this juncture, I will implore all of us to please let's welcome in our erudite speaker of today, a high-profile professor, is somebody I would like to know after this program, because this is the direction I'm still working on in my postdoctorate, to take over the platform to deliver his presentation to us tonight. Thank you very much and welcome our able professor.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, introducer. Thank you to the Nigerian Institution of Engineers, Lagos branch, for the opportunity to speak to you on this very crucial subject. It is a pleasure to be interacting with the eggheads, those whose brains are sharp, engineers. I am sure that there will be more opportunities for us to interact going forward, because we are only beginning, like you said, in your postdoctorate, but those of us who have been here for more than 20 years, there is still so much more to learn and to do. So the topic I have been given to speak on is climate action, key lessons from COP26. Very, very important topic. Please permit me to keep my video off because of low bandwidth of internet. But before I carry on, I would like for someone to unmute himself or herself and confirm that I am being heard clearly.
Loud and clear.
Yes, all is fine, Professor. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Abimbola. So, fantastic. Now, before we delve into the key lessons from COP26, let us build up our story a little bit by talking about COP as a general concept and COP26 as a particular concept. I think this is necessary because not every one of us may be familiar with the way that international climate diplomacy is set up. If you are already an expert, that is fine. But let's see if we can just use the first 1 minute or two to bring everybody up to speed. In 1992, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is the umbrella or major international regime that provides a platform for international partners, mostly countries, to come together to discuss action or lack of action on climate change. Now, with the signing of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, parties meet every year. And the meeting of these parties is what we call the Conference of Parties, or in short, COP. Now, the COP is one of the most important places where, as I said, parties meet to discuss climate change. So any country that has signed up to the climate agreement is described as a party to the agreement. Now, it is important to establish that the COP, although it focuses on parties, i.e. countries, is also a veritable platform, and increasingly so, where other actors, including non-governmental actors, for example, Action Aid, World Resource Institute, etc., Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, are also active in these conferences. The conference also provides a platform for researchers, academics, investors, multinational companies, international organizations like World Bank to also congregate in one place to negotiate climate change. The COP has, to oversimplify, two broad processes. One, which is called the mainstream negotiation process. And second, all the other events around it, what we call the side events, where people who have made progress on several aspects of climate change host their tents to discuss their progress, or also to network to decide the next direction of travel. The Conference of Parties for 26 was supposed to hold in Glasgow in 2020, but it was shifted to 2021 because it was impossible to meet because of COVID, which broke out widely and became a pandemic in early 2020. So eventually, the conference, and many of us were, some of us were among the people that put pressure on the United Kingdom that was hosting the Conference of Parties for 2026 to ensure that it holds. Because until June 2021, it was not clear whether conference was going to hold or not because of complications around COVID-19 pandemic and the rules of travel. But eventually the United Kingdom did host the world from October 31 to 13th November 2021 in the town, on the city of Glasgow in Scotland. Now, the key ways in which the United Kingdom, working with the Secretariat to the UNFCCC, framed the key ideas or items to be discussed were sort of in four categories. Number one, they wanted to secure a global net zero by the mid-century. And the desire was to keep average global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees within reach. Let me explain. The fundamental basis of climate change is that we, when I say we, human beings, have been altering climatic variables through the pumping of a variety of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, mostly as a result of industrialization activities. The chief greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, but there are a number of other potent greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide. These greenhouse gases are trapped in the atmosphere, mostly as a result of energy use, burning fossil fuels, but also partly through land degradation, burning of forest, deforestation, etc. These gases are trapped in the atmosphere where they radiate their heat and then cause the warming of the globe. This warming of the globe then results in erratic long-term weather changes, which we call climate change. And these long-term weather changes manifest itself in many forms, including drought, extreme weather events like cyclone, heat waves, flash flooding, drying up of lakes, for example, Lake Chad, etc., etc. In the work that we have done in the IPCC, which is the international body that monitors the scientific advances in climate change and serves the world with this, we found that if we continue in what we call business as usual, implement all the available or existing climate change policies around the world, that we will still not achieve the 1.5 degree target by 2100. So for those of you who do not know, we started with what we call the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, where we set a target to reduce emission by 6%, 5.5% to be precise, by 2012 compared to 1990 level, which we're calling the baseline. When the Kyoto Protocol was about to expire, we started to negotiate a replacement to the Kyoto Protocol for 2012. Eventually, after a lot of struggle and diplomatic disasters, such as what happened in Copenhagen in 2009, a new regime, a climate agreement, was agreed in Paris, in France, in 2015. This new agreement replaced the Kyoto Protocol. And it was fundamentally different from the Kyoto Protocol because once in the Kyoto Protocol, we allocated what we call emission requirements or emission reduction requirements to states. We call this quantified emission reduction obligations to states. In the Paris Agreement, because of the pressure that came from the United States and a few other countries, they said, no. We will not take quantified emission reduction obligations from anybody, especially because poor countries like Nigeria and China and others were not also taking quantified emission reduction obligations. What we will do is that we will leave everyone, every state that is a party to this agreement to tell us what they want to do from their own country, and then we put all of those pledges together. And that is the way we will tackle climate change. They argued that by allocating nations quantified emission reduction obligation, it is not consistent with the doctrine of sovereignty, but also that states will do better if they use themselves to tell the world what they want to do, rather than when somebody is allocating reduction obligations. So we then agreed in Paris a completely new different type of regime, which was fundamentally based on, okay, everyone will tell us how much emission you want to reduce. And we will call the document that you are using to tell us what you want to do, NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution. Okay, you are the nation, you determine, and you tell us, and it is your contribution. And the Paris Agreement was a departure from the top-down Kyoto Protocol, but also it created a problem that if we don't say, okay, Mr. X, reduce this amount, Mr. Y, reduce this amount, how are we going to be sure that the cumulative reduction pledges from all the countries will match with the numbers that is required to keep average global temperature increase to what scientists say is necessary to stop catastrophic climatic change, which is no more than 2 degrees warming by 2100. But anyway, that's where we ended in Paris, and people said that was a great achievement because Copenhagen had collapsed because it was impossible to bring China with the other developing countries and the rich countries together to an agreement, because at that time China was still saying, no, we're not going to take quantified emission reduction obligation because you guys are the ones that caused the problem in the West through your profligate lifestyle and your industrialization. I still have the obligation and the need to develop my countries. I can burn the coal and you cannot tell me what to do because you burn the coal to develop your own countries. And then US was saying, no, you can't burn the coal because my great-grandfather burned the coal when we didn't know about climate change. Now we know about climate change. Everyone should stop burning coal as quickly as possible. So this kind of debate was what made it difficult to have an agreement in Copenhagen. And so by the time we had an agreement in Paris, everybody thought, hey, this was great. But what it meant was that all countries, including Nigeria, poor, rich, middle income, high income, we are supposed to say what they can do voluntarily to contribute to making emission reduction meet the quantified levels necessary to contain climate change. Now, NDCs were divided into 2. You can say, especially for poor countries or developing countries, you can say what part of your NDC is what we call conditional and which part is unconditional. The conditional obligations is what you do if you receive money. The unconditional is the one you will do whether you receive money or not. Now, fast forward quickly to COP26. Scientists have collected all the pledges made from 2015 by all the countries, and it was way far from what was necessary to stop climate change. So the first obligation or goal of COP26 was to mobilize more pledges from countries to keep temperature go low and within 1.5 degrees. Because within 2015 and 2018, we did another groundbreaking work where we showed that even the 2 degrees, which was agreed in Paris, was too high, that we should actually be aiming for 1.5 degrees global warming. Because at 2 degrees already, we will cross several tipping points, which will mean that many people will suffer, and some countries such as the Atoll, the Maldives, the Tonga, all of those countries may well disappear. So that's where you get this 1.5. So what was the first goal? Secure global net zero by mid-century, stay within 1.5. The second goal for Paris was to increase effort on adaptation to protect vulnerable countries and communities. There are 2 big ways to solve climate change. Number 1 is mitigation, where you reduce the amount of emissions that you're pumping into the atmosphere. Number 2 is adaptation, where you say, okay, several emissions have already been pumped into the atmosphere. There's nothing I can do about it, but I need to adapt by building, for example, coastal defenses, integrated water zone management, planting of trees, etc., to adapt to climate change. Now, the challenge we've had was that since we started to do these COPs, the developed countries have tended to be more, let's say, interested in mitigation. They've already achieved development. They are not very vulnerable to climate change. The emphasis is on lowering their emissions. You can count the amount of carbon that you've removed. It's more measurable. Adaptation is slightly wishy-washy. What is the difference between adaptation and development? How do we ensure that rich countries are not giving money for development and we're calling it adaptation? When you build road, is that really development or adaptation to climate change? Where you improve your weather system, forecast system, is it really development or adaptation to climate change? Often it is not clear cut. So it has been a bit of a challenge for us to mobilize effort on adaptation. But in Paris, the United Kingdom said, we want to increase effort on adaptation because we can see that many people are suffering from the consequences of climate change and that we need to help them. Remember that many months before Paris, before the COP, there was a big devastating flood that happened in Germany, in US, and huge forest fire that happened in Australia. So this raised a lot of awareness about the suffering of poor people and the need to pay more attention to adaptation. The third ambition for Paris Agreement was to mobilize at least 100 US billion in climate change finance. So many poor countries say, yes, we want to take action on climate change, but where are we going to find the extra money to take this action? A research done by some of my friends in Oxford show that if countries were to take climate change seriously, it will cost them in some cases 500 times more than the original budget when climate change is not considered. So for example, a road that you would have used $100 million to do may easily cost you $500 million if you factor climate change, because the thickness of the road, for example, has to be higher because you want to ensure that it is not easily compromised in its integrity as a result of drought and flash flooding, etc. The same applies to bridges. We can see that we are suffering now from electricity failure because in part of climate change, the drying of the Kainji Dam, which then means that we have to invest more in digging deep in our dam system to be able to withstand this sort of climatic variabilities. The same applies to many other aspects of infrastructure, railways, airports, etc., etc. So the goal was set to mobilize $100 billion to help poor countries to adapt to climate change. But between 2009, when that goal was set, to 2021, when we had the Paris, the Glasgow conference, only about $89 billion had been mobilized. And so the goal was set to make sure that we increase this amount by $100 billion. And the final goal for Paris Agreement was to finalize what we call the Paris Rule Book, so as to make the Paris Agreement fully operational. What that means is that a major aspect of the Paris Agreement was to allow countries and maybe companies in some cases to trade carbon. But in order to trade carbon, you need to have a clear rules. What kind of investment count? Who can you buy credit from? Who can you not buy credit from? What is the platform that we can use to make sure that we are maintaining integrity and transparency in the transactions? The Paris Agreement was not clear about these rules. Many years of negotiation, we are failing to produce an agreement, and the UK government and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Secretariat said, we want to finish this rule book in Scotland. So those were the 4 things that were the key focus in Scotland. Now, what happened in Scotland and what are the key lessons? Let's now speed up our presentation. What happened in Scotland was that in the first few days, there was what we call a high-level session that was attended by most presidents, the World Leaders Summit. Our own president, Muhammadu Buhari, was a part of the World Leaders Summit. The first news that broke was that all the leaders there have agreed on a major action on deforestation. Deforestation is one of the ways that Nigeria contributes the most to climate change. Nigeria is losing its forest. About 50% of our forests have been lost compared to the baseline in 1970. If we continue at the rate we are going, by 2050, we will have no forest. So Nigeria signed up to the World Leaders Agreement to stop deforestation. The next day, they also signed another World Leaders Agreement, this time around to stop emission from methane. Methane is not as ubiquitous as carbon and lasts much shorter time than carbon in the atmosphere, just about 10 years or sometimes 20 years, but its global warming potential is very high, sometimes up to 10 times more than CO2. So they took action on that. President Buhari caught many of us by surprise when, I think the second or third day of the conference, during his speech, he announced that Nigeria was committing to a net zero carbon target by 2060. He said that that commitment was premised on the energy transition plan of the government. It turns out that the energy transition plan had been written by McKinsey, the international consultants, working in tandem with the ministry, the Office of the Vice President. He stressed that, yes, we are going to meet this target, but that we will soon also have to be allowed to use our gas, okay? So that was a big surprise. I am one of those that have been working on a more ambitious NDC, but also a deep decarbonization project. But some of us were not expecting that pledge. So that's what happened. So Mr. President emphasized that the federal government's effort towards greening Nigeria's economy backed by a net zero carbon pledge by 2060, as well as shifting to gas as a major source of transition energy in the country. In terms of the adaptation, parties agreed on a work program to define a global goal on adaptation, which will identify collective needs and solutions to the climate crisis already affecting many countries. They also agreed on what we call the Santiago Network to further strengthen the elaboration of the functions in support of countries to address climate change and especially loss and damage. Now, a few countries made more pledges. Parties agreed on the need to continue increasing their climate finance support to developing countries. But ultimately, despite all the noise that we made, we were not able to mobilize up to the 100 billion annually. Remember that this 100 billion is per annum, not just 100 billion. Boom. But every year, 100 billion. Every year, 100 billion. And actually, what the Paris Agreement says is that a new process has to be launched to increase the mobilization from 100 billion to much more than that. So we are thinking that maybe we should be targeting $300 billion per annum. The rule book was concluded, so it is possible now for people to talk more seriously about international carbon trading. During the last days of the COP, negotiation turned very interesting, with some people saying that we need to put a clause to phase out coal and fossil fuel, but also to remove subsidies, that countries were not allowed to use subsidies. And that divided the House. There were a lot of horse trading and negotiation. In the end, in the agreement, what was said was that we wanted to phase down instead of phase out coal, and they put inefficient in the fossil fuel subsidy. So they said, oh, they wanted to also phase out inefficient fuel subsidies. And they added that when they are dealing with the fossil fuel subsidies, that they would do that in a way that supports developing countries and vulnerable people. So that is the summary of what happened. What are the key lessons quickly? The key lessons for Nigeria is that we need to understand that climate change is one of the most significant developmental challenges facing our country today. Nigeria is in between the devil and the deep blue sea when it comes to climate change. If we do X, we may be doomed. If we don't do, we may be doomed. If we say, oh, we don't care about climate change, it doesn't matter. Our coastlines are vulnerable to climate change. The entirety of Lagos may be submerged if we hit 2.7 degrees global warming. Other states, other cities around Africa, like Banjul, will be completely submerged. Already, climate change is dealing a devastating blow to Nigeria. About 1,200 people lost their life to flooding last year, and the flooding event of 2012 cost Nigeria $16 billion US. So this is a challenge. You look up to the north, you see that how climate change is devastating the north with increasing rapid desertification, the drying up of Lake Chad, forcing more people down the middle belt side, leading to migration, internally displaced people, farmer-header conflict. If you go down south, I already talked about coastal inundation and flooding happening in Lagos and other parts of the Niger Delta region, but also flooding is helping to cause erosion, which is sucking many communities away from home. Our analysis showed that of the 5 key crops, cash crops in Nigeria, rice, sorghum, maize, millet, that some of them will lose up to 50% in terms of productive value as a result of drought and climate change. This is a big problem. No one should afford to ignore it. In Lagos alone, as I've already indicated, the places available for people to build houses will continue to shrink as coastal inundation continues to take bite. And more places will be flooded unless drastic action is taken. On the other hand, Nigeria depends on oil for its sustenance. 86% of our revenue comes from oil. Our foreign exchange earning comes from oil. Even though the number of people that oil industries employ is very, very significantly low compared to the revenue we get from it. So we cannot afford to not take action. What we need to do is to be very smart in the way we take action. What we learned from COP26 is that serious nations are planning long-term on how they can adapt. And you see that some of the calculations that we made in in Glasgow have now come back to the challenge as a result of the war that is going on in Ukraine right now. Oil prices has gone up. So there are 2 things that can happen. Either the whole of the agreement that we had in COP26 is torn up, and more people will invest more and more into oil, and that will result in greater climate change. Or the fact that Europe has been dependent on Russia and now seeks to ostracize Russia because of its invasion of Ukraine, more nations can double down their investment into renewables, which then will facilitate this transition, meaning that Nigeria could find itself high and dry and unable to sell its oil as soon as by 2035. Now, we also need to understand as engineers that one of the greatest ways in which we can tackle climate change is through what we call climate resilient infrastructure. I was speaking to the Association of Sustainability Professionals of Nigeria some weeks ago. I made the point clear that we cannot focus our action on climate change on just planting trees. The next generation action on climate change is going to be around hydrogen. It's going to be around renewable energy. It's going to be around aviation. It's going to be around how to move away from high carbon transport to green transportation through, as I already mentioned, hydrogen fuel, but also through rapid bus transit, through green hydrogen, etc., etc. So engineers must be thinking very hard about how we can re-engineer our cities, re-engineer our infrastructure, our oil infrastructure, re-engineer our road, re-engineer our transport, re-engineer our flights, re-engineer our water systems, etc., to be climate resilient. This is where the opportunity is. So companies like Arup, companies like other major engineering firms are now hiring more and more people on climate change, not only to help them to calculate their risks, their exposure, their carbon footprint, but also to re-engineer their systems, their infrastructure system to become climate resilient. This is where the opportunity is. I mentioned last week or so, and I think it was published in an article not long ago, that the NDC, Nigeria's NDC, indicates a 177 billion investment required to take action, mini grids, electricity generation, etc., etc. This is where the big engineering opportunity lie. Nigeria needs to up its game in this area, and engineers can play a very vital role. I've already indicated that Paris Agreement helped to open up nearly 23 trillion in opportunities for climate smart infrastructure. Nigeria's core infrastructure stock is currently estimated at 30% of our GDP. This falls far short of the international benchmark of 70%. So according to the Ministry of Budget and Planning, Nigeria's aspiration and infrastructure target for the next 30 years are aimed at increasing the current infrastructure stock from 30% of our GDP to 70% of our GDP. And it's estimated that this will cost about $3 trillion on investment. Our engineers need to be thinking very hard about where this investment is going to go and how to make sure that it's climate resilient. The lesson is that if you don't say here I am, nobody will say there you are. We cannot play the ostrich. We need to engage because the future is bleak for us if we fail to engage one way or the other. The green transition is already on. About 20 countries have said that they will not buy or use oil within their jurisdiction from 2035. Who are we going to sell our oil? Unless we are assuming that the war in Ukraine is going to continue. So let's think hard as engineers, how we can work with the government or private sector, NGOs, and especially the academy to invest our energy, our intellect on designing the next generation, a climate resilient future for our country. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I think many of us were expecting different slides, and I think the way we had it has been very wonderful and highly comprehensive. Before we go to the question and answer segment, I think it's important to recognize the presence of our current national chairman of the Nigerian Institute of Environmental Engineers, Engineer Shesha Odukoya, a fellow of NIE. We also recognize the presence of our National General Secretary, Engineer Afolabi Gege, and he's also a fellow of NIE. We also recognize our former chairman, Engineer Mrs. Rose Igboanogu. She's also here. Thank you for joining us. We recognize the presence of the director of the Office of Drainage Service and Water Resources, Engineer Mrs. Lanke Taiwo. You're welcome, ma'am. Also, the chairman of NIEE Abuja chapter, Engineer Bitros Linda, we welcome you. Thank you for joining us. We also recognize the presence of our former chairman, our national chairman of the NIE, Engineer Mansour Adisa Yunusa. You're welcome, sir. We also recognize the presence of Engineer Abimbola Alagbe, the chairperson of EKWUEME Lagos, the women engineer. So at the same time, we also recognize the presence of Engineer Joanna Maduka. She is the first female fellow of the Council of Regulation of Engineering, Koren. And she's also a fellow of the Institute of Electrical Engineers and the Nigerian Society of Engineers, as well as the Nigerian Academy of Engineering. Thank you all for joining. We recognize your presence, and your efforts are those that you can see now that we are having a thorough discussion that has to do with climate action. And we thank Professor Chuks for giving us a great insight into the COP 26. So before we go ahead, we'll quickly like to open the floor for questions. So if you have questions, just signify, and Professor Chuks is here to give us answers. So questions, you can also type it in the chat box. So feel free to ask the question. So we have 31 participants here. So I think we're expecting as many questions as possible. Okay, so we call on Engineer Mrs. Amuili. Please go ahead to ask your question.
Yes, good evening, and thank you very much, Engineer Ibrahim. A deep appreciation to the speaker, Professor Okereke. I mean, that was quite very insightful, and thanks for recognizing AROP as one of the stakeholders in driving carbon emission. So my question relates to the national policy on climate change that was signed by the president last year after the COP 26, and there are a lot of actions that have been listed, but I don't know if there are now pathways. I mean, there are a lot of sectoral strategy that has been listed, but I can't see specific of this is how much of carbon equivalent that this sector can achieve in 2 years, 3 years, and like that. So in all your work, are there things like that? Then secondly, as it affects the built environment, I'm a civil engineer, and we recently conducted a research on embodied carbon because, like you rightly mentioned, the focus should not be on just tree planting or an energy saving. The built environment contributes, I mean, according to the UK research, contributes about 60% of carbon in construction. So we try to do research on embodied carbon, which relates to the built environment and our area of operation. But we realize that there is data scarcity, so we couldn't adapt our local materials. So I don't know if you could give me insight on how we can do this, because in the University of Lagos at the moment, there is a researcher working on the use of cassava peel as a replacement for cement, and the structure is there. So, I mean, that's a good research, but how do we now quantify the embodied carbon? How much reduction have we been able to achieve with this replacement, and other research that are going on? So we concluded that there is data scarcity, but we also believe that we are not speaking to the right people. So we're looking at the great work.
Okay, now. Take care. That's what I've been saying since.
Okay, so let me stop it like that. I mean, there is a background noise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Prof.
Those were excellent questions. Let me give other people opportunity, but please, my detail would be with the organizers. I welcome opportunity to carry on discussion on these vital issues outside of this place. So first, you mentioned the Climate Change Act that was signed by the president after COP26. I happen to be the technical lead of the team that revised the climate change bill and did a lot of advocacy work behind the scene to facilitate the signing of the act. We did that because we felt that Nigeria needed an overarching legal framework within which climate change action can be enhanced. And critically, just along the lines that I was saying to you, that we don't believe that Nigeria will go find climate action if it is not mainstreamed into other sectors like energy, power, oil and gas, etc. And we felt that one of the things that have been militating against such integration and mainstreaming was the fragmented silo-style approach of governance, and that we needed an overarching institution to help to mainstream climate action into other sectors of the economy, including, as you rightly mentioned, the built environment, etc. And so the Act provides for a National Council on Climate Change headed by the President, with the VP as the Vice President. It has about 11 ministers, as well as a wide range of other people as permanent members, including the CBN governor. We made provision for a representative for the private sector, the ALGON, the chairman of the Governors Forum, people with disability, the youth, women, etc. But by the way, a major policy tool in that act is that Nigeria will have to do what we call a carbon budget. And the reason we fought hard to include the carbon budget as part of the National Climate Change Act is that we write a lot of policies, these NDC, these 2050 pathway ambitions, but we are not measuring enough. And because we're not measuring enough, it is very difficult to really go up there and when you're speaking with our friends in the international arena to say, look, we have reduced this amount of carbon between 19X and 19Y, or 20X and 20Y. So I was saying that one of the critical areas where Nigeria needs to make progress is data. We need to really work very hard on our GHG national inventory. And we need to begin to really quantify what we are doing and gazetting those appropriately. And so you are 100% right that it is very hard, despite the existence of some of those sectoral analyses, to really put, believable, high integrity numbers of emission reduction potentials in those sectors, but also crucially to track whatever you have put down there to measure it. If you go, any of you, when I finish talking, you can go online and Google a GHG emission inventory of the United Kingdom, and you will see that there's a live document. It is updated almost on a daily or weekly basis. And this is an open document. Anybody can look at it. And what we are measuring and recording is open for analysis by a wide-ranging stakeholder. So this is not a private property for the Ministry of Environment or anybody else. And we are not there yet. So I sympathize with you. However, as I said, I am leading on a project which we call the Deep Decarbonization Project, which we are now paying very detailed attention in modeling the emissions from all the key sectors: building, power, oil and gas, AFOLU, industry. And for the first time, we are now beginning to search for data to feed into our LEAP model to construct bottom-up data where we can really be much more confident that these are the emissions that are coming from these sectors, and that X policies have the potential to result in Y amount of emission reduction. But we are not there yet. So this is work in progress. And it applies to the building. A lot of, by the way, next year, the IPCC is going to have a special report on the cities because it's been recognized that the urban centers is really the place where climate change is going to bite the most. But this is also where most of the emissions are going to be coming in the next 2 decades. We now have, for the very first time, about 57 to 60% of the global population living in cities. The wave is continuing, the migration from rural to urban centers. Urban slums are emerging. Urban heat is a major factor, embodied carbon in building. Nigeria doesn't have a green building code. If you do have, I don't see it being implemented. When I come to where I live in Nigeria, I don't know whether it's an A building or a B building or a C building. I don't know. So these are fruitful areas for policy enterprise and action. And engineers can take also play a major role in this. In UK, if when you are hiring a house, when somebody is giving you materials to sign, you can look at the energy efficiency of that building that you're buying. And now, if you're building new homes in UK, you are not even allowed to put certain kind of materials, and increasingly you're not even allowed to pipe gas into the building because you are not expected to use heat pumps, etc. So we're not there yet. But you made mention of the need for more research, which I think tallies what I was saying before. I did a research a few years ago that showed that 60% of all the green economy literature on Africa emanate from outside of Africa. And of the remaining 40% that are published in Africa, up to 78% of those research are done in South Africa. The remaining parts are done by Kenya and a little bit in Nigeria. And we found that there are some African countries where there is absolutely nothing to rely on in terms of robust, high fidelity data on greenhouse emission. Even in Nigeria, we don't have emission modelers, scenario long-term integrated modelers. The project that I'm heading now is the very first one, to the best of my knowledge, that is trying to build modeling capacity in our Nigerian universities. So there is a need for those of us that can to really think about how we can partner with our Nigerian scientists to use local materials and ideas to solve our own problem. Imagine if we say, okay, Nigeria is now a green country, hallelujah, but 87 or 90% or 100% of all our renewable energy is still imported from China or Germany. Would you call that really a stable, resilient, green Nigeria? I don't think so. First, where are you going to get the money to import all those renewable panels, renewable energy panels or solar panels, especially when you are not selling your oil? So we're not thinking very hard about these things. We can, oh yes, yeah, we can still use our gas, blah, blah, blah. When I wrote the National Innovation Framework for the United Nations, and we went into deep about it, sorry, the African Union, we went into deep, into great depth on these things, and we find that African countries are not just ready. They don't know that this big train is going to hit them, and it's going to hit them hard. And then they're not able to sell their oil, and they have to then import solar panels from China, Germany, and they don't have the money to do that. Sorry for a long answer. All other questions, I'm going to supply 30-second answer so that we can get more.
Yeah, thank you, sir. We have another, okay, our national chairman, in person of Engineer Sheson Odukoya. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. This is quite exciting. And my other colleagues at the back end. But there's a question I want to ask is that, does that mean we and our founding fathers never had the opportunity to put standards together? I don't think it's no. I would say no, they did. That's one question, but I don't think it's so. But if they did, I think we just need to go to the archive and dig those data out and start from there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think our founding father in the environment did a lot of previous work and past works. And the other one I want to talk about that, yes, it's good to model our life outside other nations or that, but until we start having local content in our programs, they will not have them sustainable. And I think for emissions, I think when you approach the federal minister, I think there used to be federal minister of environment, FEPA, state agencies that works on so many things about environment. I think if we can go back to the green building, we could get some data from there to start with. And I think most of society, either NEST or industrial engineers, work on some of these data, and that things we need to just think about. Mama, thank God we have a engineer, Ms. Joan Maduka, who is the president or founder of the Friend of the Environment. She also can bear witness because we have so many past leaders or presidents who have worked on the environment and have some things to lay down. And I think that's what we need to go than to things that we don't have data. I think the data that we have might not just be open. We just need to go to archive and dig them out, use our opportunity. The other one I want to talk about, sir, the what's happening in the Western world, we may not be able to totally buy into this nation because local content, our temperature is a factor to us, an advantage to us. Their coal is to disadvantage sometimes. So many opportunities here that we could use. Yes, you said tree planting cannot be the only solution. I agree with you totally. Cannot be the only solution for climate change. But however, we, the professionals, that have not been involved in management of the environment or climate, need to get involved right now and come together as a major stakeholder and come up with solutions that are locally inclined, that are sustainable. I think that's where we need to go, Prof. Thank you.
So when you hear a wise man speak, what do you need to do? You don't start to repeat what he said. So thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the feedback.
I don't know whether I have lost network now.
Oh, no, your answer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm expecting another question. So okay. I agree with what the wise man said. Okay. I think he agreed with everything I said. That there's a lot of work. Wherever data is existing, we should go and dig them out and start to build from whatever we had. No need to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of work to be done. We shouldn't, of course, blame ourselves too much. Even the idea of green building coding, although it has been around for a long time, it actually took a new dimension of urgency and popularity in big countries like the UK only few years ago. So this is a growing area, but also, of course, it presents a lot of opportunity. In Australia, there was a major project by the Australian government also on green building not too long ago. They use a different system of rating than the UK. We use green, amber, red, just like the way that you label the bulb. But in Australia, they use star. I think like 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, and 4 star. When I first went and I was entering into a room in Australia, I thought it was a 4-star hotel. But they said, no, that's not about. It's a hotel. This is the way we rank how green a building is. So we can invent our own system, a local way. But this is not only work for engineers. If it doesn't have a buy-in from the government, it's not flying. So that's why we need to be working with the government. They need a regulation. We can do the calculation, but we need a regulation to make it work. But again, if you do too much of regulation, when people are struggling hard to even find small money to put additional block on their building, and they are not using a lot of Korean registered engineers to build. And even the existing rules in Lagos, for example, are being flouted, leading to collapse of buildings. How about where we go with this thing now? So a lot of work facing us, but where there is a will, there is a way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this. I think we also have, I think, Engineer Dr. Igwiki. I think you had your hand up before. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. And I think I will call on the Vice Chairman, Engineer Yusuf Majalagbe, to present the certificate.
Yeah, I have a question, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Prof. We really enjoyed your presentation, and I think we have a lot to do at the level of the institution to make a lot of these things happen and come to reality. Now, my question is, I mean, I remember about in 2009, it's a long time, and most of the things that I was taught as a master's student at the University of Aberdeen then is particularly about the energy mix. And when you look at coal is about number 2 on the energy mix. And the little I read before this, before this technical session about COP26 is that we need to actually consign coal to history, and by 2030, we need to, forget about all the developed countries need to have need to be to run zero on coal, and by 2040, all the countries in the world should stop, thinking about to develop coal into energy. So what can you say about that? Can't we have clean coal? I know Dr. MURITALA is also a liquid expert. So how do we, strike a balance between the energy mix and getting coal out of the radar? Thank you, sir. Yeah, Prof, I'm done, sir.
Okay. So yes, you're right. I think I mentioned it though in my presentation that one of the key objects for conversation and in the Glasgow Pact was about coal, and people, the discussion whether we wanted to say phase out, which ended up with phasing down of coal. And before then, you may recall, if you've been following the news, that China, under pressure, had already announced in the United Nations General Assembly that happened in September before that COP that they were going to stop investing, funding coal in all jurisdictions outside of China. You may also recall that one of the big headlines in Glasgow was the fact that a $7.3 billion deal had been agreed with South Africa to enable South Africa to move towards the green transition. But if you peel further, you will know that that money is basically given, a lot of it is basically given to ESCOM. ESCOM in South Africa, not of course directly, but basically is to help ESCOM to make a transition. Again, engineers have a major role to play in these. There are a lot of emerging technologies for, if you like, making coal cleaner. We can debate that. Some people think that once you dig it up, it can be clean. But carbon capture storage, new ways of pulverization of coal, and there are quite a number of other emerging and existing clean coal processes and technologies. The developed countries felt that that is not enough. that we need to really just be consigning coal to history. Some of the coal-dependent countries we are saying no, that with new technologies, it might be possible to green or clean up coal. In the end, we said phase down, which implies that the coal contribution to global energy mix by 2030, 2040 is expected to be next to nothing. Of course, China is building more coal-fired power plants than any other country in the world. The total number of coal-fired power plants in China is more than the total of the world combined. So if we're gonna deal with coal decisively, we will need action from China. But again, this is part of why you guys are engineers, but okay, so we've talked about engineering a lot, but this is also why climate action is not really an engineering thing per se. It is about social science as well. You move away from coal, hundreds of thousands of people's job will be endangered. How do you ensure that these people who are going to be losing their job are reskilled, and that the transition away from coal or other high carbon energy processes or systems are done in a way that is socially just, that is equitable, that is fair, that does not lead to the further marginalization of those that are already vulnerable, that does not lead to the precariousness of work. How do we ensure that these people are absorbed and retrained in greener processes, which may require higher order of skills? So this complicates the discussion, taking it away slightly from engineering design to more social sciences. When we make this transition, we need to bear in mind that there are some people who have built a lot of wealth on the back of coal, those in the UK, those in other parts of the world. Now Nigeria has to, a lot of African countries have to stop using coal. How do we ensure that they are assisted in a way that is fair and equitable? This is beyond the scope of our analysis here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. We have a lot of comments in the chat. So from Engineer Lanketaiwo, well done, Professor, that was a good one. From Engineer Mansoura Abimbola, very insightful presentation, a total package on SDG 13, and a client call for the professionals to think of environment right from what go into our design.
My budget is to 6 o'clock.
Yeah, so yes, we call on Engineer Majalabe to, Engineer Majalabe, are you there? Engineer Majalabe?
Yes, I'm with you. I'm trying to, just 1 minute.
Don't worry, I have it here. So
okay, can you share it? Okay, thank you.
Go ahead. Just go ahead.
So on behalf of the Nigerian Institution of Environmental Engineers, being led by our very dear engineer, Mrs. ABIOLA KOSEGBE, FNSE, FNIEE, I would want to really appreciate you firstly for your time and commitment to this course. I mean, if you want to pick someone in this country or sub-Saharan Africa that is very passionate, then you need to be talking about Professor Chukwumerije Okereke as far as climate change is concerned. And we want, on behalf of the institution, present these certificates to you. I mean, if we had carbon credits, we will have, you know, I know you will appreciate that so much. We will have actually presented that to you in addition to this certificate. And I mean, we thank you for making this March 2022 technical session a very, very interesting and insightful one. On behalf of the institution, I present these certificate of appreciation to Professor Chukwumerije Okereke. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, engineer. Thank you. We've saved some carbon credit, and I don't mind. I don't mind bank credits as well. So thanks very much.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, sir. So yes, I think I will just
my presentation, but I have not. I just spoke from my head.
Exactly. This is what I was also trying to inform everyone that it was from the head, not from any slide. So thank you, and we appreciate that, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So while we just want to give a short brief of what to expect for the year. So now that we have, I think okay, I have to mute someone. Good. So now today we've had Professor Chuks Okereke, and he has given us the insight into key lessons from COP26. So next month, we're also going to have someone who is also a project management institute accredited authorized trainer in person of Mrs. Adiroti Bolande. She's going to give us a lecture on executive project management for environmental engineers. In May, we plan to have a conversion of plastic waste to eco-brick. And in June, we plan to have the expert stakeholder workshop, which will focus on Lagos State environmental management and protection law review. In the coming months, which is July, so we also plan to have the student chapter activity, so which will focus on youth climate education and action workshop for them. So this is something we want to do with all the student chapters from Lagos State Polytechnic, Lagos State University, down to even all the universities that we have in Lagos and institution we have in Lagos State. In the same June, we want to also do this World Environmental Day, which is also our major activity. Then in July, we'll be having the renewable energy systems, understanding the energy mix, climate impact and opportunity. So in August, we plan to have a courtesy visit to the Lagos Ministry of Environment and Water. So September, we want to have the industrial visit. And October, we'll be having our AGM. So all these dates, I will continue to remind you on all platforms and try to make it a time with us. So I think we also have some training that are coming up, which has to do with wastewater treatment system, enhancing environmental engineering management and businesses using GIS, renewable energy system. We have training on eco, green bus, and other topics like that. And I think we had some training last year that has to do with environmental data and how to use this data to make impact. And these are part of what Professor Chuks has also informed us, that there is a need for data, there's a need for all of us to work together. It's a multidisciplinary activity that needs to be done to help us meet up with the climate action. So before we leave today, I will also call on Engineer Omoife to give us a vote of thanks. And yes, and Engineer Omoife, are you there?
Yeah, thank you, Engineer Ibrahim. Hello, Engineer Ibrahim.
Yes, go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. A very good evening to everyone. A special thank you to our guest speaker, Professor CHUKWUMERIJE OKEREKE, for accepting our invitation and for being here with us today. Your thoughts have truly inspired us. To our elders and member of NIEE Lagos chapter, we thank you for making out the time. Your presence is very well appreciated and encouraging. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great evening, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, and bye-bye to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.